Hi everyone. Tonight we're going to the Colosseum. No, not to look at the ruins like a bored tourist with a sun hat and a bottle of warm water. We're going back to when it was alive. When it roared. When the games were everything. The blood. The bread. The bone-deep noise that never left you. Right now, the sky is just starting to bleed orange. I'm still in bed, but my eyes are open. You don't sleep much the night before a major game day, not unless you're one of the lucky few with seats under the awnings. And even then, you probably dreamed of lions. You probably won't survive this day. Not if you're in the arena. Even if you're in the crowd. Something in you doesn't walk away the same. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. And hey, drop your city and the time you're listening. Always cool to see where we're tuning in from. Now, turn off the lights. Maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise. And let's get started tonight. I blink up at the wooden rafters above my cot. I live in a cramped apartment on the third floor of an insula, not the worst floor. But you can feel the latrine smells wafting up sometimes. There's already noise in the street. The fishmonger's kid is yelling something about salted eels. A group of men are laughing too loud, clearly already into their wine, and a cart rattles past dragging amphorae of something sharp and sour. It's game day. I toss off the thin blanket, splash my face with the coldest water I've got in the basin, and throw on my tunic. Not the white one. I don't want blood stains showing if there's a splash. I go for the brown one with the stitched hem. It has pockets. I jam in a few bronze coins. I might want olives later. Outside, the entire street has one direction, east, toward the Colosseum. It's still dark enough that the torches burn along the alleys. But you can see the pale glow on the horizon. The air smells like roasting barley and sweat. Rome always smells a bit like someone's cooking something weird and someone's dying slowly nearby. An old woman sitting by the corner gives me a look. Going to the games? She asks. As if there's any other reason for a man to be walking with purpose before the second cockcrow. Of course. I grin. Aren't you? She spits on the ground. Haven't been since my son was taken in for thieving and came back in pieces. So that's a good omen. As I round the forum and join the wider crowd flowing through the stone arches, I get that weird, nervous feeling in my gut. Like before a festival. Or the first kiss with someone who might actually break your heart. The Colosseum looms ahead, still dark in the shadow of the hills. But already alive. I can see figures on the top level. People moving like ants. Arranging things. The giant canvas awnings, velarium, are being drawn open like the wings of some beast. Birds scatter from the roof like they know what's coming. Now here's a quirky detail most tourists don't know. If you stand far enough back, you can actually see the tiny holes along the Colosseum's walls where giant poles used to slot in. They held up the velarium, massive shades manned by sailors, of all people. Why sailors? Because they knew how to handle wind. I pass a man selling miniature wooden swords. "Gladius for your little gladiator," he shouts. I almost stop to look. Then realize I don't have kids. Or a reason to be sentimental. Now, here's something weirdly comforting. Every time I come to the Colosseum, the city feels a little more synchronized. Like all the bickering, scheming, marketplace shouting, and Senate nonsense fade for a day. We're all here for the same thing, to watch someone else bleed. So we don't have to. A guy beside me bumps my shoulder. He's tall, wearing a soldier's cloak, though it's dusty and torn. Probably retired. Bet they open with executions. He says. They always do. I reply. Gotta get the crowd warmed up. He laughs. You know, back when I was stationed in Germania, they made us watch replays of old fights. For morale. Never the warm-up acts though. Too messy. I nod. Not much morale in watching a thief get dismembered. We fall into step, and even though we're strangers, we move like we've known each other for years. That's the Colosseum effect. It's like the world hits pause and we all become part of the same animal. The animal wants blood. We get to the main gate, and that's when it starts to really hit me. The size, the scale, the sheer absurdity of how many people have gathered. Tens of thousands. Some are already halfway up the steps. Some are bargaining with guards. A group of nobles get ushered in through the side gate. Must be nice. Old age wisdom says, never trust a senator in the arena. He'll applaud you with one hand and stab you with the other. Anyway, I'm not a senator. I joined the long queue like the rest of the plebs. A man next to me mutters that he's been waiting since last night. I don't doubt him. He's got straw in his hair and eyes like a man who's seen ghosts. The line moves fast. People are loud, already drunk, betting on which gladiator will win today. Some waving little carved tokens in support of their favorite fighters. I hear a woman shouting that she once saw a Retiarius take down 2 secutors at once. Everyone around her tells her she's lying. But she doubles down. This is the joy of the line. Gossip. Exaggeration. Communal delusion. A pair of teenage boys in front of me are arguing about whether the best fighters come from Thrace or Gaul. One says Thracians are faster, but the other insists Gauls are stronger. Doesn't matter if you're strong. The first one says, if you can't dodge, you're meat. I lean in. If you've seen enough fights, you know it's always about who watches the emperor. They go quiet. Maybe I sound like a veteran. I'm not, but I've seen enough to talk like one. As we reach the first archway and the shadow of the Colosseum finally covers us, it gets cooler. My skin prickles. Not from fear, at least. Not only fear, but from that strange thrill. I'm about to witness things no one will believe tomorrow. You don't just watch the games. You survived them. We were all pressing forward now. Shoulder to shoulder. As the gates creaked wider. The stone beneath my sandals felt cool and uneven. Worn down from decades of feet like mine passing through. Thousands of times over. And still, The guards looked bored, impossibly bored, considering they were manning the threshold to a day of state-sponsored carnage. One of them lifted his arm lazily and gestured for the crowd to move faster. "If you get trampled, we'll step over your bones," he muttered, not loud enough to matter. He wasn't joking. The bottleneck into the vomitoria, that's what they call the stadium entrances, by the way, tightened. The name makes it sound gross, but it just means these corridors were built to spew out crowds fast. Roman architecture had a flair for drama, even in its vocabulary. I ducked my head, elbowed past a man chewing loudly on a fig, and stepped into the dark tunnel that led into the seating tiers. The smell changed instantly. Less outside air, more sweat, damp stone, and the unmistakable tang of wet iron. Not fresh blood, yet, but the memory of it. When I finally emerged into the open, the light slapped me. The sun had fully risen. The arena glowed like a golden bowl. Shadows stretched long across the sand in crisscross patterns from the partially drawn velarium overhead. It looked both magnificent and dangerous, kind of like a lion stretching. I was in section 23, way up. If you think nosebleed seats are a modern problem, you've never hiked 4 stories in sandals with no railing. It was like ascending a mountain of elbows and arguments. "Watch it, goat breath," someone behind me barked. "Then quit pushing like your toga's on fire," I shot back. We were all a little feral already. Once I got to my tier, I scanned the marble bench rows and found a narrow space between an elderly man snoring upright and a woman breastfeeding a baby who looked far too calm for what was about to happen. I slid in, tried not to breathe too deeply, and glanced around. Here's something they don't put in history books. The real battle at the Colosseum wasn't in the arena. It was finding a decent seat and holding it. We had no assigned numbers. No ushers. Just invisible codes everyone knew. Don't sit in the senator's ring. Don't argue with a guy in armor. And if a vendor tells you to move, just move. They control the snacks. From up here, the arena looked small. You'd never guess it was nearly the size of a modern football field. But you could see everything. The gates where the beasts would enter. The trapdoors rumored to have swallowed men whole. And the Emperor's box, glinting with polished bronze and guarded by praetorians who looked like they hadn't blinked since dawn. A teenager next to me whispered, "Do you think they'll feed a traitor to the lions today?" "Only if he's spicy," I said. The kid laughed. "That's one." In my peripheral vision, I spotted a group of upper-class women fanning themselves with ridiculous ostrich feather contraptions. They were seated just above the podium, their eyes scanning the arena like hawks. I heard once that some of them kept detailed journals of every gladiator they saw, who won, who lost, who looked the best shirtless. Apparently, fashion critiques weren't just for the Senate. Behind us, a man started shouting about the poor acoustics of the Colosseum. "You can't hear the swords from up here," he complained. "It's like watching ghosts wrestle in a sandbox." His friend nodded solemnly. The design favors spectacle, not sound. Very academic of them. And he wasn't wrong. While the Colosseum could seat around 50,000 to 80,000 people depending on how many elbows were counted, the sound didn't travel the way you'd expect. Cheers and gasps felt delayed, like watching a thunderstorm before the thunder. I adjusted on the stone bench, already regretting not bringing a cushion. A woman behind me offered a spare fig wrapped in linen. I thanked her. She nodded without a smile. No one smiles much before the first blood. Looking down, the arena still sat empty. Just smooth sand, raked fresh, like it hadn't seen a drop of violence yet. That illusion wouldn't last long. To pass the time, I eavesdropped shamelessly. Someone a few rows down was betting 3 denarii that a murmillo would win today's Primus match. The murmillo was usually built like a wall, armed with a short sword and heavy shield. Helmet shaped like a fish. He'd face someone fast. Maybe a Thrax or a Retiarius. Always a good contrast, muscle versus speed. Old Roman logic. Make every fight look like a metaphor for empire. Oh, here's a weird one for you. In the early days, the Colosseum supposedly held naval battles. Yeah, real water. They flooded the arena and had ships clash like it was a miniature Mediterranean. I'm skeptical. Sounds like a logistical nightmare. But you'd be surprised what rich men with a taste for absurdity will attempt. The sun kept rising. The stone beneath me grew warm. The vendors finally started climbing the steps, shouting their goods. I bought a handful of stuffed dates from one and a little cone of salted chickpeas from another. Somewhere nearby, someone uncorked a wineskin. Not long after, a loud hiccup echoed. From the arena floor, drums began to pound. Not music, rhythm. Like a heartbeat, it echoed through the stands and hushed some of the noise. That was our signal. The gates at the far end began to creak open. Slow and theatrical. Even from up here, I could see the shine of metal and the flash of something colorful behind them. The day was about to begin. You could feel it. That subtle tilt in the air when thousands of people collectively inhale. Eyes narrowed, bodies leaning forward, the kind of silence that screams in your bones. People like to say Rome was built on stone and strategy. I think it was built on that moment, when everyone believed something enormous was about to happen and couldn't look away. I had just enough room to cross my legs, barely. My knee still brushed against the fig lady's basket, which she kept nudging away without a word. The baby on her lap, impossibly calm, now stared at the arena like he already knew what came next. The warm-up acts were about to start. You could tell by the way the drums shifted tempo, faster now. More urgent, like a second heartbeat below ours. The air changed too, not just the smell, which grew sharper and muskier, but the mood. It was like everyone suddenly remembered this wasn't a holiday. It was a ritual. First out, the condemned. The gates ground fully open. And from the darkness stumbled a group of men in chains. Dirty tunics. Blank expressions. One was missing a sandal. Another looked up at the crowd. Bad idea. You could see the panic in his eyes. Trying to lock onto a sympathetic face. There weren't any. An announcer's voice boomed from somewhere we couldn't see. Not the emperor. Not yet. Just a herald. He listed off their crimes like ingredients in a recipe. Theft. Murder. Arson. Desertion. Treason. Something about touching the Vestal Virgins, which everyone around me gasped at in synchronized scandalized unison. One man dropped to his knees in the sand, arms outstretched, pleading with someone in the emperor's box. Not a smart move. One of the guards moved forward and cracked the flat of a sword against his shoulder. The man fell forward, then didn't move again. The crowd roared. We're a generous people, until someone begs. Then we want them to shut up and die quietly. The fig lady behind me muttered. Serves him right. The innocent dies silently. Okay, Grandma. The executions weren't fights. They weren't dramatic. They were more like stage performances with a lethal twist. Sometimes the condemned were armed with sticks. Sometimes nothing at all. They'd be tossed in with beasts or given rusty swords and told to fight each other while heavily armored guards laughed. Today it was animals. Two large gates on either side of the arena rumbled open, and out came the stars of this grim opening act, a pair of lean, yellow-eyed cats, panthers or lions. Maybe one of each. The crowd shrieked as if the animals could jump the walls. They couldn't. Not really. But it was fun to pretend. One of the condemned tried to run. Bad choice. The cats liked movement. They pounced. It wasn't fast. That's the problem. You think it'll be like a gladiator slicing a clean line through someone. But this, it dragged on. A chase. A claw. A scream. Dust. Blood. More screams. A pause. Silence. Then cheering. Here's your academic debate of the day. Were the executions truly public justice? Or just theater? Scholars argue over whether they were deterrents or distractions. But when you're sitting there, watching it unfold, none of that matters. You're not thinking, moral consequence. You're thinking, am I next? And somehow, that makes you cheer harder. A vendor came by with honey cakes during this mess. Yes, honey cakes. Because apparently nothing pairs with state-sponsored animal mauling like a sweet pastry. I bought one. Don't judge me, it had cinnamon. Someone behind me whispered, you can tell the real criminals. They don't cry. Another replied, that, or they're too scared to remember how. Off-topic fact for today. Lions were shipped from Africa in specialized cages and often starved just enough to ensure they'd be motivated in front of a crowd. Logistics in Rome? Brutal and efficient. After the final convict went down, torn, trampled, or just too tired to scream anymore, the arena went silent again. Not out of respect. Just the kind of lull that happens when you've filled a space with enough blood to dampen the excitement. That's when the cleanup crew came out. Not joking. Men with shovels, big rakes, a few guys with brooms. They wore simple tunics and had that dead inside look of janitors everywhere. Except instead of gum wrappers, they were scraping limbs and sand into piles. Kids around me laughed. Some pointed. One tried to wave at the guy with the rake. That man didn't even blink. We waited. No one moved. The crowd was holding its breath again. The executions were the starter course. What we wanted was the main event, the real drama. The duelists. The pros. The gladiators. People leaned forward. I leaned forward. You could feel it coming. The far gates began to rise. Out came the fighters. They didn't run. They walked. Calm. Deliberate. In formation. Even. Each with a different set of armor. Weapons. And aura. Some wore helmets with feathers. Others had tattoos. One guy had muscles like he was chiseled from marble and oiled to a mirror shine. Another was lean and scarred. Eyes half-lidded like he hadn't woken up yet. They saluted the emperor with swords held high. The crowd roared. We all shouted the phrase. Half sarcastic, half ecstatic. Avenue Imperator, morituri te salutant. Hail, Emperor! Those who are about to die salute you. We all said it like we were part of the cast. In a way, we were. The Emperor didn't rise, just gave a nod, expression unreadable. He was flanked by advisors and guards. Drinking from a golden cup like this was a garden party. Rumor had it he hated the games, but couldn't stop them. Politics, right? The gladiators began their introductions. Each was cheered or booed based on reputation. One crowd favorite, a Thrax with a fish-shaped helmet, lifted both arms and did a little spin. The women screamed. The men threw coins. This was it. Warm-up's over. Real show starting. People shifted on the benches, nudged their neighbors, and pulled children onto laps. A woman passed down a small amphora of watered wine. Someone farted loudly and blamed the fig lady. I swear she didn't even blink. And then the horn blew. The horn sounded once, long and low, like a groan from the gods themselves, and that was the signal. No more giggling children. No more vendors yelling about candied figs or goat jerky. Just silence, then steel on steel. The first match began with a pair of murmillos, broad-shouldered men wearing heavy helmets and thick greaves, each holding a rectangular shield and a short gladius. They circled each other like lions, and we leaned in as one, hungry for the first clash. And it came with a crack. Shields slammed, sand sprayed. One of them staggered back, grunted, then charged. This was no choreographed dance. Every move risked a sliced artery or shattered bone. And yet they fought like dancers who'd trained their entire lives to die gracefully. I'll be honest, part of me didn't want to like it. The blood, the violence, The whole barbaric display. But my body didn't get the memo. I was tense, breathing faster, eyes glued to every swing and dodge. You don't go to the Colosseum to stay calm. There's an old age saying we use in Rome. Asterisk, victory is born before the battle begins. I never understood it fully until I saw the look in that Murmillo's eyes, calculated, empty of hesitation. The other one flinched first. And just like that, he lost. The victor knocked his opponent's helmet clean off and pressed his sword to the man's throat. The crowd stood. We held up thumbs, pollice verso. Now here's the academic debate. Did thumbs up mean life or death? Truth is, we don't actually know. But in that moment, the crowd chanted a single word. Asterisk, miti, asterisk. Spare him. The emperor, lounging under silk and shade, nodded once. The Murmillo lowered his sword. The loser was dragged off. Not dead, at least. Not yet. The next fight came fast. Two Riccieri, net and trident fighters, darted into the arena like mischievous sea spirits. They were lighter, faster, flashier. Their movements had a rhythm, almost like music, as they danced around their opponents, two secutors in heavier armor. I heard someone whisper, "You can tell who grew up poor. The agile ones. They learned to run first." The net fighters worked in tandem, distract, trip, stab. One managed to trap a secutor's arm and yank hard enough to unbalance him. The other struck fast with the trident. Blood arced in a perfect fan, catching the sunlight before it hit the sand. The fig lady behind me said, very casually, "They won't clean that. Blood's meant to soak in. Makes the arena hungrier." Pretty sure that was either a metaphor or a curse. Off-topic fact of the day? Gladiators didn't always fight to the death. Most of them were investments. Property of rich men or training schools. You don't send a racehorse to the slaughter every week. You train him, you bet on him, and when he dies, it better be asterisk worth it. Between matches, attendants came out again, not to clean, no. The blood stayed. They were there to rake the sand smooth. Set the stage for the next drama. Think of it like brushing fresh snow before a ski race. Gotta keep it beautiful, even when it's built on violence. During the lull, someone passed around olive cakes. Another man started arguing loudly about whether Thracian gladiators had better footwork than Gauls. Classic armchair expert. He hadn't even seen a real Thracian fight. Probably. But he'd read a scroll or two. And that was enough. Next up, the beast hunters. They weren't gladiators. Not exactly. They were called venators *, and their job was to make killing animals look elegant. Think acrobatics meets archery, with a little suicidal flair. A door opened and out came three massive boars, snorting. Aggressive, covered in dust. The venators waited. Spears in hand, every muscle tense. These weren't farm pigs. These were tusked nightmares that could rip your thigh open like papyrus. The crowd gasped as one lunged, and the hunter leapt straight over it. He twisted in midair, spear raised, and landed just in time to drive it into the beast's shoulder. It screamed, yes, screamed, and thrashed until two others helped finish the job. You know the weirdest part? It was beautiful. It shouldn't have been, but it was. There's something about the way death moves in a circle here. How the animals run, fall, and fade into the same sand that drank up the condemned. You start to realize that the arena isn't a place where justice lives. It's a place where all things are made equal. Rich or poor, free or slave, man or beast. Equal, because eventually, they all feed the Colosseum. Some scholars say these beast hunts were to showcase Rome's mastery over nature. Others argue it was simply spectacle. Bread and circuses. Distraction from taxes and grain shortages and corrupt officials. But when you're there, sitting shoulder to shoulder with strangers all gasping in unison, you don't think about politics. You just watch the sand and listen for the next horn. And then came the match everyone was waiting for, a champions duel. A veteran gladiator versus a fresh recruit. Classic drama. We knew the names, everyone did. The champion was called Titus Verus, a legendary Demacharis, wielded two swords like extensions of his arms. His entrance alone was enough to send the crowd into a frenzy. Feathers on his helmet, gold trim on his shoulder guards. The man gleamed. The newcomer, meanwhile, looked barely old enough to grow a beard. Thin, pale, probably sold into the games by a desperate family. His name? Nobody knew. Nobody cared. The bell rang. Titus didn't rush. He strolled forward like a man checking the weather. The boy, let's call him the boy, kept backing up, lifting his shield like it weighed more than he did. The crowd shouted advice, insults, cheers. I heard one guy yell, "Stab like you mean it, not like you're stirring soup." Pretty sure that was a joke. I laughed. But then something happened. The boy landed a hit. Not deep, but enough to draw blood. The arena went silent for half a breath. And then roared. Titus grinned, not angry, impressed. He picked up the pace. And the dance began for real. They moved like fire and smoke, fast, unpredictable. I lost track of the blades. Just flashes of silver and red. When it ended, it was fast. Titus disarmed the boy, pinned him down, blade to his throat. Silence. Thumbs rose again. The emperor tilted his head. And then, nodded. Spared. The boy collapsed, sobbing into the sand. Titus raised both arms. The crowd exploded. We didn't see the emperor smile. But we felt the permission to cheer. So we did. The horn blew twice. Intermission. I didn't realize how sore my back was until the horn blew and everyone stood up at once. The stone seats were unforgiving. Even with the thin cushions some of the wealthier spectators had carried in. My thighs had gone a little numb, and my mouth was parched. But I couldn't bring myself to leave just yet. Intermission wasn't a break from the spectacle. It was a spectacle of its own. Vendors flooded the aisles like ants swarming a dropped fig. They yelled over one another, hawking honeyed nuts, cheese-stuffed dates, watered wine, and fried dormice skewered on little twigs. One man walked past me with an entire roasted chicken impaled on a dagger like some culinary trophy. Another shouted, "Fresh cucumbers, like a bath for your mouth." I bought a cup of cold vinegar water, Posca. It's called. Tastes like regret and lemon. But it's surprisingly refreshing when the sun's trying to melt your skin off. There's an old age wisdom that goes. Asterisk, only fools ignore the heat of the stones. And sure enough, the sand in the arena shimmered like glass. The handlers out there, sweating through their tunics, were dragging in new props, setting up for what looked like an elaborate reenactment. Turns out, this next event was a *Naumachia*, a staged naval battle. Not in water, obviously. The Colosseum used to have a functioning system to flood the arena floor. But those days were over. This was the dryland version, with wheeled ships and smoke machines. Honestly, it was campy and amazing. The ships were massive wooden cutouts on carts, pushed by strongmen in tunics dyed ocean blue. There were cannons, slingshots, and painted waves on the backdrop. The crowd was eating it up. The battle itself told a story, loosely based on a Greek legend none of us fully remembered. Pirates attacking a Roman supply fleet. One guy narrated the action from a raised platform, like a modern sports commentator but with a lyre. Every time a fake cannon fired, someone in the crowd screamed dramatically. At one point, a man pretended to fall overboard and flopped around on the sand like a dying fish. Was it historically accurate? Not even close. Was it entertaining? Absolutely. Here's the quirky fact of the day. Some emperors used real prisoners during these mock battles. If your sentence was death anyway, why not die dramatically on a fake ship, waving a flag as the crowd chants your name? Honestly, if I had to go, that's not the worst way. Halfway through, someone behind me started snoring. I turned around. It was an old man holding a half-eaten pomegranate. Completely out cold. His grandson nudged him awake, muttering, "You missed the Pirate King's flaming sword trick." The old man blinked and said, "I'll catch the next war." When the final pirate died, flailing theatrically as red-dyed sand puffed up around him, the audience gave a standing ovation. Not sarcastic, either. Everyone loved it. A man next to me wiped a tear and whispered, "That ship died nobly." Then the arena crew cleared the props again, back to business. There's something surreal about how quickly the mood shifts in the Colosseum. 1 minute, You're laughing at a cardboard sail collapsing. The next, the doors creak open and 6 prisoners are marched into the arena. Naked but for loincloths, blinking into the sun. They weren't fighters. You could tell immediately. These were the condemned. One of them was trembling so badly his knees kept knocking together. Another looked up at the crowd like he was trying to spot a god. The third just stared straight ahead, eyes glazed over. And then the beasts were released. Lions. 3 of them, massive, golden, silent. They didn't roar. That's a myth. Mostly, these creatures didn't need to. They just walked in like they owned the place. Like they were bored of killing but would do it anyway. Because that's what the job required. The prisoners ran. Not fought, ran. It was chaos. One man tried to climb a pillar, only to be pulled down by the ankle. Another curled into a ball and sobbed until a lion batted him across the sand like a rag doll. The crowd was strangely quiet. Not somber, just watching. Eyes fixed, faces blank. It reminded me of the old saying, asterisk, the Colosseum doesn't scream. It inhales. Eventually, the animals were called off. Only one man was still breathing. Barely. The attendants dragged him out by the wrists. No applause. No fanfare. Just silence. And the sound of rakes sweeping up crimson sand. Academic minds have long debated whether these executions served a political function. Was it deterrence? Public control? Religious offering? Maybe it was all of that. Maybe none. All I know is that I felt something heavy settle in my chest. Not guilt. Exactly. More like the weight of witnessing something you're not sure you were meant to see. A friend beside me broke the silence with a whisper. We'll remember him longer than the Pirate King. And just like that, the mood shifted again. The next event was meant to lighten the tone. A group of comic gladiators, dressed in mismatched armor and oversized helmets, stumbled onto the field and immediately tripped over one another. Think of it like ancient slapstick. One guy kept falling on purpose and yelling, "Ouch! That was my spleen." Another had a sword so floppy it bent every time he tried to stab someone. We laughed. Loudly. Genuinely. There's something weirdly comforting about knowing even the Romans had dumb comedy sketches between trauma reels. It reminded me of how theater and war always dance together. 2 masks on the same face. You cheer. You gasp. You laugh. You cry. And then you do it all again because that's what the show demands. As the sun dipped lower, the shadows in the arena grew longer. Everything glowed with this strange golden light, like the gods had decided to watch the end of the games with us. I leaned back, sipping the last of my sour posca, and listened to the rustle of 100,000 spectators settling in again. The next horn blast would signal the final rounds. and I wasn't ready to leave yet. When the horn sounded again, it wasn't just loud, it was bone deep. You could feel it in your ribcage like it was vibrating your soul. Or maybe that was just the anticipation. The final round was about to begin. This was what everyone had come for. Not the mock battles. Not the comedy. Not even the beasts. This was the real show. The gladiators. Now, I know what you're thinking. Gladiators. Big swords. Dramatic deaths. But it wasn't exactly like that. These guys were professionals. Stars. Think modern athletes. But with a much shorter life expectancy and slightly fewer endorsement deals. The crowd roared when the gate lifted. Two men stepped out. And let me tell you, these weren't desperate, starving prisoners. These were warriors. Trained, sculpted, confident. One wore the short, curved sword of a asterisk Thrax, along with a high-crested helmet that gleamed in the sun. The other was a asterisk Murmillo, broader and heavier, with a rectangular shield that could probably block a chariot if needed. They didn't rush each other. They circled. It was quiet, eerily so. This wasn't wild, chaotic violence. It was chess, with swords. The first few clashes were all about positioning, testing, one strike, a shield block, a step back, sand kicked up with every movement, catching the light. A kid next to me gasped every time the swords made contact. Chain asterisk, like metal breathing. I leaned over to my friend and whispered, 10 denarii says the Murmillo drops his shield by the third strike. He laughed. I'll take that bet. Old age wisdom says, asterisk, the man who watches a blade too long forgets his own. And I could see that playing out below us. The Murmillo had the reach. But the Thrax was faster. You could tell who had the crowd, every time the Thrax dodged. Someone yelled, like lightning. Eventually, the Murmillo made his move, a big, sweeping strike meant to disarm. And right on cue, he overextended. The Thrax pivoted, ducked, and slashed across the Murmillo's thigh. Not deep, but enough. The crowd gasped. The Murmillo stumbled back, breathing hard. Blood stained the sand beneath his leg. Dark and slow. You could see him weighing his options. Keep fighting, or yield? He dropped to one knee. And here came the moment of truth. You've probably heard about the thumbs. Here's the quirky fact. It's still debated whether thumbs down meant death or mercy. Some say it was the reverse. Others argue it was just a gesture to the emperor. Today, it didn't matter. The crowd looked up, not at the fighters, but at the emperor. He sat in a shaded box, leaning forward, eyes locked on the scene below. Then, very subtly, he lifted one hand. Thumbs turned downward. The Murmillo bowed his head. The Thrax approached slowly, like he wasn't quite sure if this was real. Then he raised his sword, and drove it down. Clean and quick. No flailing, no screaming, just silence. The crowd erupted. I didn't cheer. I didn't move. I just watched the sand soak up the moment. This, the academic minds might say, was a state-sponsored spectacle of power. Rome reminding us all who controlled life and death. But to me, it felt more personal, like watching a god blink. The Thrax bowed deeply, then walked off alone, his blade still red. Somewhere in the stands, people threw laurel wreaths and coins. One man tossed a bronze bracelet and shouted, "Drink on me, hero." And then, the second fight began. This one was different. A woman stepped into the arena. Yeah, that's right. Female gladiators were rare, but not unheard of. They were called gladiatrices. Some people loved it, others called it vulgar. But there she was, tall, with braided hair and a net in one hand, a trident in the other. A retiaria asterisk. Her opponent was a secutor, built like a boulder, round shield, heavy sword, low helmet with tiny eye slits, clearly not built for speed. From the get-go, it was clear, she was toying with him. Dancing just out of reach, tossing the net, retreating, then striking with the trident. The crowd adored her. Someone yelled, "Marry me." Another shouted, "She fights like Juno with a hangover." She didn't land many clean hits. But she didn't need to. The secutor was getting slower. Sweat dripping down his chest. Panting, she kept moving, tapping him with the net like she was playing tag. Eventually, he charged, big mistake. She sidestepped, caught him with the net, and yanked his legs out from under him. He hit the ground like a collapsed pillar. And then, silence again. Everyone waited. She stepped forward, raised the trident, and paused, looking up at the emperor's box. This time, the hand stayed still. So the crowd voted. They cheered wildly. For her. For the artistry. For the performance. This wasn't about blood, it was about spectacle. And the spectacle had delivered. She bowed. He was spared. Both fighters walked off. That's something the books don't always mention, sometimes. It wasn't about who died. It was about who made the crowd forget they were sitting on sun-baked stone for hours. There's an old proverb, asterisk, the best warrior wins your heart before your bet. The sun was starting to set now, casting long shadows across the seats. You could feel the arena relax. People stretched, yawned, chatted. Someone next to me passed around figs soaked in wine. Another pulled out a wax tablet to write notes. Maybe a review for a patron. Or just a memory for later. And I just sat there, thinking about how much had happened in a single day. I had laughed. I had flinched. I had clapped until my hands stung. I had seen men live and die. And I had witnessed a woman command an audience with nothing but grace and timing. As we waited for the final horn, I looked around at the faces, sunburned, dusty, but still enchanted. We weren't just watching a show. We were part of it. The final horn didn't startle me this time. I was ready for it. Or, at least, I thought I was. You don't really brace yourself for what came next. The thing is, when you've already seen blood, death, comedy, and naval warfare, all in one afternoon, you figure nothing else can surprise you. And then the gates opened, and they brought out the elephants. Not just one, 4. They emerged slowly, like ancient gods awakened from slumber. Draped in armor and cloth of gold, each step sent a soft thunder through the floor. One of them had blue paint swirled over its trunk like a tattoo. Another carried a tower on its back, where 2 men stood with bows drawn, waving to the crowd like senators on holiday. Now, I had heard rumors of elephants at the games before. But rumors and reality are different things. You hear elephants, and you think, oh, majestic animals. How impressive. What you don't expect is how big they are, how quietly they move, or how human their eyes seem when they pause and look straight at you. The crowd gasped, not in fear, but in wonder. Even the emperor leaned forward slightly, eyebrows raised. That's when I knew this wasn't part of the original schedule. This was extra, a gift, or maybe a warning. Old Roman wisdom says, when the circus gives more than expected, the empire prepares for less. I'll let you sit with that one. The elephants weren't here for a show. Not exactly. They were here to parade around while trained animal handlers juggled torches, climbed ropes, and performed tricks off their backs. Think of it like a halftime show, but with significantly more risk of trampling. The quirky part? One of the elephants actually bowed. Like, front knees bent, trunk curled inward. The crowd lost their minds. That moment of magic didn't last long. After the elephants left, the mood shifted once more. The sun had dipped lower, and the air cooled just enough to make people pull their cloaks tighter. Shadows crept up the arena walls, swallowing the bright reds and yellows in favor of dusty grays. And then the final procession began. You've probably seen it dramatized, trumpets, banners, all very theatrical. But here's how it really goes. A single drummer walks out first. No fanfare, just a steady, slow rhythm. Boom, boom, boom. Then come the prisoners. This time, there were 12 of them. They walked in chains, bare-chested, shoulders stooped, not from shame, but exhaustion. These weren't gladiators. They weren't criminals sentenced to death for petty theft. These were rebels, political ones, the kind the empire doesn't forgive. Each one was led by a guard with a short sword and a vacant expression. Like he was doing laundry, not walking men to their death. The crowd was silent again. Not out of respect, out of anticipation. The execution didn't happen with beasts this time. No lions. No elaborate traps. Just swords. One by one. Now, I won't go into too much detail. We're not here for gore. But I will tell you this. It was disturbingly fast. The first man tried to kneel but collapsed. The guard waited until he lifted his head, just slightly, then did what he had to do. The second tried to run. He made it maybe 3 steps before a javelin pinned him to the sand like a bug on display. The rest didn't move. There's an academic debate that argues the public execution of traitors served a dual purpose: justice and deterrence. But when you're in the crowd, you're not thinking of jurisprudence. You're thinking about whether or not the condemned are crying, or praying, or looking for someone to save them. One of them did look up into the crowd, locked eyes with someone. Maybe a family member. Or maybe no one at all. After the last body fell, there was no applause. Just the soft sound of rakes again, leveling the sand like nothing had happened. Then came something unexpected. A single horn. Not a battle signal. Not a start or end cue. This one was low, soft, almost mournful. And a group of performers entered, dancers in flowing robes. Painted faces. Slow movements. A funeral procession, of sorts. It wasn't in honor of the dead. Exactly. More like an art piece. A transition. A way to tell the crowd, the violence is over. You may breathe again. They danced with lanterns, weaving between shadows as if guiding souls to some quieter place. One held a small lyre and played a tune so gentle. I saw an old woman in the crowd wipe her eyes. Even the emperor stayed seated. This wasn't entertainment anymore. It was ritual. And then, as the last note faded, the lanterns dimmed, and the Colosseum exhaled. People started to gather their things. Cloaks, food scraps, sandals, children. A man near me stretched so far he popped his back and said, "I feel like I fought 2 battles just from watching." I didn't want to move. There's something about that moment, the pause after the final act. When the noise hasn't returned but the silence feels full. Like the walls themselves are holding their breath, waiting to be empty again. Off topic but somehow relevant. Did you know the Colosseum once flooded not with water, but with perfume? During the reign of Nero, they sprayed rosewater into the crowd to soothe the soul. Today, we got blood, fire, and elephants. Tomorrow? Who knows? There's an old saying passed down from the sand sweepers. Asterisk. No one leaves the arena as the same person who entered. And I believe it. As we filed out through the arches, the sun just barely clinging to the horizon, I looked around one more time. At the great stone stands. The rutted sand. The imperial box now empty. The Colosseum didn't feel like a building anymore. It felt like a mouth. And it had fed well today. I slept like a corpse that night. No dreams. No shifting, just blackness. I think my brain needed a full reset after what it had witnessed. But when I woke up the next morning, sore and groggy, I realized something strange. I wanted to go back. You'd think after a full day of slaughter, ship battles, and emotionally confusing elephants, I'd be traumatized. But no, the Colosseum had its hooks in me. I wasn't the only one either. People were already buzzing about today's games at the bakery line. Did you see how that Gaul spun the trident? They say there's going to be a rhinoceros today. My cousin's cousin says they're reenacting the fall of Troy. And so I went. Because that's the thing about being a spectator in Rome. You go for the spectacle. But you stay because deep down, you want to feel things you don't get from grain taxes and slow poetry readings. This time, I arrived a little earlier, mid-morning. The city was already warming up, and the amphitheater's outer walls glowed amber under the sun. Vendors lined the streets like vultures on payday. Roasted chickpeas, oil for sunburns, cheap wine, and even a guy selling padded seat cushions, bless him. Inside, the crowd was thicker, louder. I found myself wedged between two older men discussing logistics of the games like war generals. They'll use the north gate for the animals. Easier access. No. If they reenact Troy, they'll need to bring in the horse. That's South Gate. Old man wisdom of the day. Asterisk. If the crowd debates the entrances more than the exits. Prepare for a long afternoon. Soon, the drums began again. But today had a different flavor. The opening act was mythological. Think of it like ancient cosplay, but with higher stakes. They'd recreated the story of Prometheus, complete with a chained actor on a fabricated mountain and a live eagle trained to swoop down and peck at his side. It was stylized. Of course, no actual evisceration. But the screaming? That was real enough to make a toddler cry 3 rows over. The crowd loved it. They threw flower petals. This is the weird part of Roman entertainment. One moment, you're watching a man pretend to be a god punished for bringing fire to humanity. The next, you're watching two guys dressed as Achilles and Hector, dueling with real blades. I mean real blades. One of them caught the other's arm and a streak of red spurted out like a fountain. Is that part of the act? Someone behind me asked. Nope. These were condemned men, acting out myths for their last hours. If you died dramatically enough, you got remembered. If not, just another name lost to the sand. And I'm not going to lie. Watching myth come to life like that was captivating. The actors bled, yes, but they also moved with choreographed grace. It was like watching art in the moment of its own destruction. Academic debates rage over whether these mythic reenactments were true drama or just sophisticated execution. In the stands, the lines blur. All you know is your heart is pounding. And your eyes don't blink. Then came the fire stunts. Oh yes, Roman engineers loved a good controlled blaze. The stage was transformed into Troy in flames, smoke machines, okay. Pots of burning herbs, red dyed silk to simulate fire. And some poor guy running across the arena in a full wooden horse costume. The heat reached us in waves. And right when I thought they'd maxed out the drama, the floor opened again, revealing a pit of ash and glowing coals. Two performers emerged wearing flame-resistant tunics. How? I don't know. Maybe salamander skin? They danced on embers while balancing swords on their heads. It was hypnotic, like fire was something alive and playful rather than terrifying and fast. Quirky moment of the day. A stray dog ran into the arena during the burning Troy sequence and began barking at the wooden horse like it owed him rent. The crowd roared. That's the Colosseum for you. Fire, tragedy, and a barking dog all within the same 5 minutes. After the embers cooled and the smoke cleared, a chariot came barreling in, not for a race, but for a ceremonial sweep. The driver, tall and stoic, held a wreath aloft like he'd just won a war. The wreath was placed atop the central pillar, marking the arena's official purification. You know, in case the eagle pecking and human torches had dirtied the vibes. People took this seriously. They stood. Some even crossed themselves, yes. Before that was technically a Christian thing. Ritual matters, even when it's wrapped in spectacle. Here's something I didn't expect. Between events, poets recited verses over the loud horn system. Today's theme? The price of glory. I caught fragments. Steel is memory made sharp. Blood is the ink of the empire. Only the forgotten died twice. It was honestly good. Made me wish I'd paid more attention to my uncle's literary salons. A woman next to me whispered, "That's not just poetry. That's a message. Something's coming." I nodded, not because I knew what she meant, but because she clearly wanted someone to agree. Later, I'd understand. Anyway, the final performance of the day wasn't combat. It was something much stranger. They released a giraffe into the arena. Yep, a full-sized, spotted, gangly-limbed giraffe, ambling around like it was lost in a fever dream. The crowd lost its collective mind. Laughter, gasps, people standing on benches to get a better look. The animal didn't fight. It just walked in circles, head swinging side to side like it couldn't believe it was here either. Trainers tossed it fruits. A man played a flute. It was almost tender. Why end the day with a giraffe? No idea, but it worked. A softer end, a cooling note after the fire. As we exited the Colosseum, some people were still laughing, Others talked in hushed tones, trying to piece together the subtext of the poetry and myth. I walked slowly, not because I was tired, but because I didn't want to lose the spell just yet. There's a saying I heard once, bread fills your belly, but stories feed your soul. And somehow, the Colosseum managed to serve both, plus wild animals and mild trauma. Today, I didn't leave the same person I arrived. Again. It's funny what sticks with you after a day in the Colosseum. You'd think it'd be the fire or the sword fights or the blood, but no. I kept thinking about that giraffe. The way it tilted its head. The weird grace in its awkward legs. The way it just existed. So calmly. In the same space where men had died hours earlier. Maybe that was the point. The Roman mind liked contrasts. Pain and peace. Death and beauty. A giraffe as a chaser to the chaos. Who needs therapy when you've got existential animals? Anyway, I went back the next day. I know. At this point, you're probably thinking I had a Colosseum punch card. 5th visit is free, but the truth was, the games had become part of my rhythm now. Wake up, toss water on my face, grab a honeyed flatbread, and head toward the place where the world turned upside down. This time, I arrived earlier still. Sunrise. There were already people waiting at the gates. Some had camped out with jugs of wine and loaves of crusty bread wrapped in linen. The energy was different today. Buzzier. Almost reverent. One guy leaned over and whispered, "Today's the Emperor's surprise." "What kind of surprise?" I asked. He winked. "The kind with teeth." Spoiler alert, it was lions. Lots of them. But I'm getting ahead of myself. As I squeezed into my seat, same place, left of center. Mid-tier, the sun crept up, bathing the arena in gold. That morning light made even the blood-stained sand look like a painter's canvas. I sat next to a young woman this time. She sold lamps, she said, but took the day off to see the big one. She didn't elaborate, just offered me a dried fig and asked if I thought lions could cry. Weird question. I said no. She shrugged. Neither can senators. Weird wisdom of the day. When power stops feeling. It gets loud. Suddenly, horns blared. Not the usual, games are starting, horns. These were deeper, slower, a dirge with muscle. Out marched 20 gladiators in a perfect square formation. Shields raised, swords flat against their thighs. Their armor shimmered like storm clouds. And behind them, cages. 6 of them, covered in heavy cloth, rumbling from within. The crowd went completely silent. Then the emperor himself appeared, draped in purple, smug as a cat that ate a senator. He raised his hand, and in a practiced voice, declared something I only half heard, but the words, "justice," "traitors," and "divine spectacle," stood out like spilled wine on white marble. And then, dramatic pause, he pointed to the cages. The cloths were pulled. Lions. 6 of them, one white as snow, 2 golden, one mottled with dark streaks like spilled ink, and the last 2 massive, scarred and lazy-eyed, like they'd already done time. The crowd gasped. One man literally fainted. Another shouted, "That's from Nubia. I saw one like it eat a horse." And then they brought in the condemned. There were 5, not gladiators, just regular-looking guys in tunics. Bound hands, wide eyes, supposedly traitors, though nobody seemed to know what they'd actually done. They were placed in the center of the arena. No weapons, just fear. The gates to the lion cages creaked open. The silence before that first paw hit the sand? It was unbearable. You could hear someone chewing celery 6 rows over. And then they pounced. But here's the thing. They didn't go straight for the men. Not at first. They prowled, circled, sniffed the air. One even rolled over like it was bored. The men panicked, of course. Tried to run. One tripped. The white lion watched like it was judging their cardio. Then, finally, action. And I'll stop here to say, I'm not describing what happened in detail. You get the picture. It was fast. It was loud. It was ugly. What stood out most wasn't the violence, it was how quiet the crowd stayed. No cheering, no clapping, just the low, uneasy hum of people realizing they were part of something not entirely human. The lions were eventually lured away with hunks of raw meat. The remains were cleared. And then came a moment I'll never forget. The emperor stood again. He gestured to the sand and said one word, mercy. A 7th man was dragged forward. Younger than the rest, maybe 20, terrified, but the emperor spared him. Just like that, the crowd exploded with relief and applause. See? The games didn't just kill. They manipulated, controlled. They reminded you who decided who lived and who didn't. Academic folks still debate whether these mercy moments were genuine or staged. I'd say both. It was real enough to make us feel things. But it was also theater. Roman politics, performed under the sun with sand and sweat. Quirky fact of the day. During the pause that followed, a group of trained birds flew in to spell victory, with colored ribbons tied to their legs. One of them broke formation and dive-bombed an old senator, who screamed like a child. Best moment of the day. After the lions, things got lighter. A mock sea battle, yes. They flooded the arena again. Some comedic duels involving rubber chickens, sort of. And a display of Roman engineering that raised a marble statue from the ground using counterweights and smoke. At one point, a mime pretended to be a dead gladiator returning from the afterlife to critique his own form. Look at that foot placement. No wonder I died. People roared, By sunset, the sand looked like a painter's palette, streaked with red, black, gold, and ash. I stayed until the last torch was extinguished, walking slowly through the corridor of arches, listening to the mutter of the crowd. The lamp seller girl was beside me. "You think the lions dream about us?" I said no again. She just smiled and said, "Good. I don't want to be in that dream." That night, Rome felt quieter. Or maybe I was just hearing less. The Colosseum had taken a little piece of me. That seems to be its trade. But I still planned to return tomorrow. I thought I'd gotten used to the Colosseum by now. Turns out, I hadn't. You never really do. Just when you think you've seen the worst, or the strangest, it surprises you. And today? Today was absurd, elaborate, and somehow, cozy? Let me explain. I showed up mid-morning this time. Slept in a bit. Dreamed about lions wearing senator togas. Which honestly felt like a metaphor I didn't want to unpack. Anyway, by the time I arrived, the seats were filling fast. There was a buzz in the air. But not the sharp, dangerous kind like the day before. This was a festival buzz. Let's bring the kids vibe. A guy next to me was wearing a tunic covered in painted dolphins. I complimented it. He said thanks and offered me a honeyed fig wrapped in bacon. I didn't ask where he kept it. "Today's for the masses," he explained. "They call it the People's Day. Games for joy, not fear." We'll see, I thought. And sure enough, when the trumpets blared, the first act wasn't a fight, it was a parade. A literal, glittering, absurd parade. There were dancers dressed as mythical creatures, minotaurs with papier-mâché heads, nymphs throwing flower petals, even a guy on stilts painted entirely gold, walking like he had no bones. Behind them came a cart pulled by goats. On it sat a boy dressed as Bacchus, the god of wine, waving a chalice and giggling uncontrollably. Probably not acting. It was ridiculous. It was charming. It was Roman. And then the comedy matches began. Now, comedy, in the Colosseum doesn't mean what you think. It wasn't stand-up, it was slapstick. Staged fights with ridiculous weapons, spoons, oversized nets, wooden fish. One guy came out wielding 2 loaves of bread like nunchucks. He did a whole routine where he blocked a spear with a sourdough roll. The crowd lost it. Even I cracked a laugh. It was a weird, refreshing shift after the tension of the Lion Day. Like the Colosseum itself needed a palate cleanser. Here's the old age wisdom I overheard from a wrinkled man behind me. Asterisk. You can't feed fear every day. Sometimes you must serve foolishness with figs. Honestly, true. Midday brought an odd display. A contest of impersonations. 4 gladiators took turns mimicking famous politicians. One did a perfect impression of a governor known for falling asleep mid-speech. Another mocked the emperor's walk, dangerous move. but done with such skill that the crowd howled instead of gasped. The guards laughed too, so I guess he was safe. Then came what they called the Beast Parade. But this time, no killing, just exotic animals on display. Ostriches. A peacock so arrogant it refused to walk. A bear that had been trained to wave, sort of. And even a pair of monkeys that kept trying to steal a noblewoman's earrings. Quirky fact of the day? Romans believed monkeys could talk but chose not to. Because they didn't want to be enslaved. Honestly, fair. Now, amid the silliness, a serious undercurrent always bubbled beneath. You could sense it. People laughed harder than the jokes deserved. Because here's the thing. When you're under an empire's thumb, laughter can feel like rebellion. There was one moment where it all clicked. A mime came out alone. No props. He pretended to be a regular citizen. Waking up, going to the market, paying taxes, hearing bad news, going to the Colosseum, dying. All silent. The crowd sat still. No laughter. Just the sound of wind and one distant kid yelling about grapes. And then he took a bow and left. That was it. It hit different. I don't think Rome ever forgot that one. The academic interpretation here, widely discussed, is that such silent plays were the only safe way to criticize Roman life in public. Art in disguise. And it worked. People walked away stirred, but without knowing exactly why. Later, to pick up the energy, they brought in children, not for fighting, thank the gods, but for reenactments. Miniature gladiator battles with wooden swords and cardboard shields. A tiny chariot race with goats pulling little carts. Adorable chaos. One girl, maybe 6 years old, pretended to defeat a barbarian and dramatically yelled, "For the glory of SPQR." The crowd stood and clapped like she was Cicero reborn. Even the emperor showed up briefly, tossed a handful of coins from a balcony, then disappeared like a magician with taxes to raise. By sundown, the arena was messy. Confetti, feathers, spilled drinks, and a surprising amount of carrot peels. I still don't know why. Maybe it was symbolic. Maybe someone just brought too many carrots. The guy in the dolphin tunic leaned over and said, "You know what the best part of today was?" What? No one died. He was right. That, more than the monkeys or the miming, was the strangest thing about it all. A Colosseum event with no death. It felt like we'd borrowed the place from its ghosts. Let it be something else for just one day. As we filed out, I passed by two teenage boys sword fighting with sticks, reenacting the slapstick duels. One pretended to lose dramatically, falling backward into a basket of dates. A woman nearby muttered, "Even our children train for spectacle." Yeah, Rome raised performers. That night, as I walked home, I passed an old statue of Mars, the god of war. Someone had put a flower crown on it. It didn't look silly. It looked tired. We can laugh all we want, I thought, but the war comes back tomorrow. I woke up the next morning to the sound of drums. Not the deep, battle march kind, but lighter, higher, almost playful. The kind that made you pause mid-yawn and wonder if something ridiculous was about to happen. Turns out, it was one of those mystery-themed days at the Colosseum, which usually meant the organizers were either out of ideas or trying to test how far they could stretch Roman patience before someone complained to a senator. Today's theme? The elements. I kid you not. Earth, water, air, fire. It was like a school science project funded by an emperor with too much wine and too little supervision. I got there early, partly because curiosity was clawing at me, mostly because my neighbor had invited his mistress over and their argument had turned into an opera. Free entertainment's one thing, but not before coffee. So here I was, third row stone bench, squinting into the hazy morning sun, when the first event began, a tribute to Earth. That translated into a team of gladiators dressed as farmers, planting fake crops in sand while dancing awkwardly to lyre music. One guy, clearly a real fighter and not a performer, just sort of stomped around in a circle holding a carrot. Then they brought out a giant ox sculpture, wooden, very detailed, probably built by someone with too much time and access to glue. It plowed a fake field while a child read poetry about soil. Yes, soil. I think we all learned something about humility that morning. And then came water. This was where things got splashy. They'd partially flooded the arena overnight. Not all the way, no full namakaya today, but enough to fill a shallow basin. Maybe ankle deep, and reflect the sky, which was poetic, I guess, unless you were the one who had to clean it afterward. They staged a mock sea battle using flat-bottomed boats shaped like fish. Men in tunics and badly drawn scales fought with sponge-tipped spears. At one point, someone fell overboard and started dramatically pretending to drown, only to be rescued by a woman dressed as Neptune's daughter riding a dolphin puppet. 10 out of 10. Would watch again. Now, old age wisdom moment here. Whispered by a man who looked like he'd fought in at least 3 real wars and 0 fish battles. Asterisk, the water reflects truth, but men still lie to it. Whatever that means, it sounded wise enough to nod at. For air, they released birds, first doves, which scattered like a wedding gone wrong, then falcons, which immediately tried to hunt the doves. I don't think that part was planned. Still, it got cheers. Romans love a good natural hierarchy in action. Next, they released a man in a homemade glider. That's right. A glider. Wings strapped to his arms. Feathers tied with twine. The whole thing held together by hope and what I can only assume was wax. He ran from one of the upper levels. Jumped. And for one glorious second, soared. Then he nosedived into the marshy part of the arena and disappeared in a splash the size of a small bathtub. Everyone stood in silence. Then someone clapped. Then we all clapped. He got out, dripping, limping slightly, but grinning like an idiot. That guy became a local legend. The flying fool of the forum. I'd have bought his autograph if ink weren't so expensive. Now, fire. Oh boy. They saved fire for last because, obviously, what could possibly go wrong with that? They brought in fire dancers, torch jugglers, even a man who breathed fire using something that smelled distinctly flammable. I swear, I saw the safety officer praying under his breath. The torches lit up the Colosseum in flickering oranges and golds. And for a moment, it felt like we were watching a living sun perform for us. Then the grand finale, a fire chariot. Picture this, a chariot shaped like a phoenix, covered in oiled cloth, lit at the edges, drawn by two terrified-looking horses. It didn't last long. The cloth caught too fast. The chariot cracked in the middle, and the driver had to leap out like a circus performer as it all fell apart in a fiery mess. Nobody got hurt, somehow. But we all agreed, fire won the day. And here's your quirky fact. Romans thought fire was a living being. Like a spirit. They even had a fire goddess, Vesta. Some believed fire could hear you speak. So when the chariot crashed, a woman behind me crossed her fingers and muttered, "We meant no offense." Academic debate time. There's this ongoing argument about whether these elemental spectacles were borrowed from earlier Greek rituals or purely Roman pageantry. Honestly, after seeing a guy in a bird suit pretend to ride wind, I'd say it's a bit of both, with a dash of whatever fungus the playwrights were eating. As the crowd shuffled out, soggy, soot-covered, and vaguely confused, I stayed seated a while longer. You know what stuck with me most? Not the fire or the flying or the giant ox. It was a child, maybe 7, sitting behind me. She tugged her father's toga and whispered, "Why do we make fun of the gods?" He didn't answer, just patted her head and kept watching. But I thought about that. Because even in all the absurdity, there was something sacred happening. Something ancient and weirdly beautiful. Maybe the Colosseum wasn't just for blood and noise. Maybe it was also for asking questions we didn't really want answers to. As I walked home through the quiet streets, bits of ash still floated down like dark snow. The sky was pink. Someone was singing off-key near the bakery. My sandals were soaked, and my cloak smelled like burnt fish. But you know what? I felt lighter. Like air. That evening, back in my modest little apartment with the cracked ceiling and the occasional rat I pretended was a roommate, I sat in the doorway with a fig and some bread, just watching the street wind down. The chaos of Element Day was still sinking in. You'd think a flaming chariot crash would be the kind of thing you forget quickly, but no. It lingers, like smoke in your tunic. The next morning, I wasn't planning to return to the Colosseum. Not out of protest, or injury, or any kind of dramatic vow. I just really needed to do laundry. But then my neighbor, yes, the one with the screaming mistress, poked his head through the curtain and said, "They're bringing animals in today. Big ones. From Africa." Well, goodbye dirty laundry. Hello carnivorous wildlife. When I got there, I could already hear the crowd murmuring like a kettle about to boil. The Colosseum was alive with anticipation. And I swear even the pigeons seemed more excited than usual. I found my usual spot, worn stone, but with a good angle, and settled in as the arena gates creaked open. Out came a procession of handlers with ropes, cages, and a surprising amount of raw meat. The first animal? A lion. Not some scrappy jungle version either. This thing was huge. Muscles like braided rope, mane like a sunburst, and a stare that made me instinctively check how far I was from the nearest exit. It was paraded around first, shown off like a crown jewel. The announcer, loud as ever, shouted over the applause. This beast once ruled the Nubian grasslands. And then they let it go. No fight yet, just the lion. Pacing, smelling, almost bored. You could feel the tension. Like we were all holding our breath waiting to see if it would pounce or nap. Eventually, it didn't either. It laid down and started cleaning its paw. A man behind me muttered, "He's mocking us." Honestly, I agreed. Next came the exotic birds, ostriches, flamingos, and something called a cassowary, which I now believe is nature's cruel joke. That thing looked like it was halfway between a dinosaur and a very angry librarian. It chased two handlers around in circles for a good 10 minutes before finally being herded into a corner. Quirky fact of the day? Romans believed ostriches could digest iron. That's right. There was this rumor that if you dropped a sword in their cage, they'd swallow it and burp out the handle. Spoiler. No swords were digested that day. Then, the main event, the animal fights. Now, here's where things get morally muddy. The crowd wanted spectacle. They didn't necessarily care whether it was two gladiators or two giraffes doing the fighting, as long as it was violent, loud, and bloody. But the animal combats? They were different. Sometimes it was lion versus bear, or leopard versus wild boar. They'd bait them, rile them up, and then release them into the arena with nowhere to run. Some animals refused to fight, just stared at each other. That always made the crowd restless. Other times, well, it got ugly. I won't go into the worst of it. You already know it wasn't pretty. But one match stood out. A tiger, sleek and pale orange, was paired against a bull. We thought it would be over quickly. The bull looked terrified. And the tiger? That thing moved like liquid fire. But when the gates opened, the tiger didn't lunge. It circled. It watched. And then it pounced not on the bull, but the handler hiding behind the wall. That sent everything spiraling into chaos. Handlers rushed in. The tiger leapt over a fence. The crowd screamed. Someone threw wine. It was a disaster. But here's the kicker: the bull escaped. Just trotted out the other side like it had an appointment. I swear I saw it wink. Old age wisdom alert. Asterisk. Even the fiercest predator hesitates when the world's watching. Said by a toothless man beside me, holding a fig and looking smug. He probably used to be a beastmaster or philosopher, or both. You never know in Rome. The academic debate surrounding animal fights is intense, by the way. Some historians argue that these matches were symbolic, man conquering nature. Empire over wildness. Others say it was just cruelty with a toga on. Honestly, both can be true. Rome loved its metaphors just as much as it loved a good scream. Midday. They brought out the elephants. Now, elephants in the Colosseum are a whole other mood. They don't fight unless provoked. And when they do, it's terrifying. But these ones were trained. They marched in formation, lifted their trunks, even danced to flute music. One of them painted something on a canvas with its trunk. I couldn't tell what. Maybe a tree. Maybe someone's mother, but the crowd lost their minds. People tossed coins. A senator wept. I think I did, too. And here's something weird. Romans thought elephants were philosophers. Not like wearing glasses and writing scrolls, philosophers. But that they could understand sorrow, loyalty, even justice. There's a story about an elephant who refused to step on a criminal because it sensed the man was innocent. Today, one of the elephants paused in front of a child waving a ribbon and just stood there, staring. Then it knelt. No command, no trick, just reverence. The arena went silent. For once, nobody cheered, nobody moved. We just watched. When the elephant finally stood and walked away, it felt like we'd seen something sacred. Like the gods had dropped in for a moment and nodded. Yep, that one's worth remembering. As I walked home, the sun was setting, casting long gold fingers across the forum. My feet ached, my mind buzzed, and my tunic smelled faintly of straw and roasted meat. But my heart? That felt full. Full of strange animals and quiet wisdom and the odd beauty of a city that could be both monstrous and magical in the same breath. I was starting to think I'd seen everything the Colosseum could throw at me. Flaming chariots? Check. Roaring beasts? Double check. Mysterious elephants with an emotional range deeper than most senators? Triple check. But today was different, not because of what was happening in the arena, but because of who I sat next to. Let me backtrack. I arrived late. Blame the baker who forgot my order and then tried to flirt his way out of it with a burned loaf. By the time I got to the amphitheater, my usual seat was gone, occupied by a family of 4 with way too many olives and not enough spatial awareness. So I wandered higher than usual, ending up next to an older man with a cane carved like a snake. His tunic was dusty. His hair pulled back into a knot. And when I sat down, he barely glanced at me. Just muttered, "You missed the dwarf acrobats." My loss, clearly. The morning segment was light, jugglers, magicians, and a man who wrestled his own shadow. But as we sat there, the old man began muttering under his breath. Not at me, but at the arena. It was subtle at first, commentary on how the actors moved. How the music didn't match the mood. Then, during a pantomime about Jupiter seducing some mortal maiden, again, he leaned in and whispered, "Do you know the Colosseum's true purpose?" I blinked. Entertainment? He smiled without humor. "It's not about bread and circuses. It's about stories. Power is told in stories. And Rome makes sure she tells hers loudest." Now, normally, I'd assume a statement like that meant I'd sat next to a conspiracy theorist or a retired playwright. But something in his voice, low, steady, patient, made me listen. He pointed to the actors. "Notice how the emperor is always brave, always merciful. Even in a comedy, they make him seem like a god. Even when mocking him, they raise him." I hadn't thought about that. But he was right. The scripts were clearly edited for imperial flattery. Always had been. Maybe I just never noticed because the jokes were good. He added, "Rome doesn't just conquer lands. It conquers memory. You come here to cheer a gladiator. And you leave remembering the empire is invincible." It wasn't the first time someone had tried to tell me the Colosseum was more than blood and dust. But this felt different. It felt like I'd been let in on a secret everyone else was too distracted to see. Right then, the crowd exploded into applause as an actor portraying Hercules swung a foam club at 3 bandits. The audience roared, children screamed, and my old seat neighbor just looked unimpressed. He turned to me again. "There are scrolls buried beneath this place. Beneath the sand, beneath the bones. Scripts, decrees, rewrites. Every emperor adds a new chapter. Even in death." We sat in silence for a while. The show moved on. A dramatized, Glory of Rome tale where the lead actor rode out on a fake horse that collapsed halfway through the scene. Naturally, someone yelled, "That horse is more Greek than Roman," which earned a round of laughter and a thrown pair. Old age wisdom of the day? You can tell a city's soul by its theater. That came from the man beside me, of course. He said it while chewing something I think might have once been an apricot. Eventually, he stood up, nodded at me like a father might when leaving a son behind, and disappeared into the crowd. No name, no final proclamation, just gone. The rest of the day felt a little off after that. Like the stage had shifted. Like I wasn't just watching a show. I was watching an idea pretending to be one. During the intermission, I wandered under the arches, letting the smell of roasted pine nuts and vinegar wine waft over me. A young couple kissed under the shadow of a marble column. Nearby, a group of boys debated whether an eagle could beat a crocodile in a fight. My bet? Neither. A goat with attitude would take them both. Quirky fact of the day: in some parts of Rome, people genuinely believed the Colosseum was a portal to the underworld. Not metaphorically, literally. A place where spirits drifted, where ancient gods still watched. Considering the acoustics and the occasional unsettling gust of wind, I kind of get it. When the afternoon show began, the theme shifted: legendary failures. Stories where heroes fell. Rome rarely staged these. Failure wasn't popular, unless it ended with a triumphant comeback or a noble sacrifice. The play was about a soldier who disobeyed orders to save his brother, only to be executed for treason. The final scene? His ghost standing at the gates of Elysium, asking whether duty or love mattered more. Nobody laughed. Nobody cheered. It was quiet, uncomfortable, real. And I realized then, the Colosseum could make you cheer, but it could also make you think. It wasn't always about roars and spilled wine. Sometimes, just sometimes, it was about reflecting what we feared the most: being forgotten, being wrong, being human. As I left, I walked slowly, past the vendors, past the guards, past the dark tunnels where gladiators had waited their turn. I paused at the entrance and turned around. The Colosseum glowed in the evening light, still buzzing with cheers and drama and mystery. Rome might conquer memory, but some days, memory fights back. Leaving the Colosseum after a full day of games is like stumbling out of a dream: hot, loud, and vaguely unsettling. Your ears are still ringing from the crowd. Your clothes carry dust, and every step feels heavier than the last. I didn't realize how tightly I'd been clenching my fists until I reached the Forum and finally exhaled. Around me, the crowd poured out like a river, laughing, arguing, reenacting their favorite deaths with way too much enthusiasm. And I mean that literally. A group of teenage boys was dramatically reenacting a lion mauling using a cloak and some unfortunate fig vendor's cart. One even roared, with commitment. Rome after the games is chaotic. The streets near the Colosseum swell with wine-soaked spectators, most still buzzing from the adrenaline. The air, once thick with sand and blood, now smells like spilled ale, sweat, and roasted garlic. If you ever wanted to see Rome at its most alive and slightly unhinged, this is the moment. I took the long route home, partly to avoid the worst of the crowd, partly because I needed to think. The city always felt bigger after a day like this, as if the games had stretched it, pulled its corners wide with noise and violence. And now Rome had to breathe itself back together. Children ran barefoot between carts. Musicians played half-tunes on cracked lyres. I passed a man loudly proclaiming the emperor was descended from Mars. Bold claim. Even bolder considering he was standing on a box wearing nothing but a red sash. And in all this madness, I heard something else. Soft murmurs from older folks clustered in doorways. Not gossip this time, not news, but reflection. He should have lived, one woman said about a gladiator who died that afternoon. Too good to go like that. They didn't even bury him properly. Someone else replied. It's strange. We call it entertainment. But when a crowd favorite falls, the city shifts. Grief mixes with superstition. People light candles. They whisper the gladiator's name like he was a hero, a martyr, or maybe something even more sacred. There's a shadow that lingers after the games. Not fear. Exactly, Rome doesn't scare easy. But a restlessness. A knowing that something real happened inside those marble walls. Something we can't laugh off with more wine. And speaking of wine, I found myself outside a little tavern tucked between two bathhouses. A place I'd only been once before. Years ago, when I'd followed a girl with curls that bounced like coins. Tonight, I wasn't chasing anyone, just quiet. I slid onto a stool. The owner, an old man with a voice like gravel, poured me something sweet and dark. He didn't ask where I'd been. He knew. They feed the city, then send it home hungry, he said. I blinked. That's poetic. He grunted. It's just true. Old age wisdom of the day? A man who cheers at death too easily forgets he'll face it himself. He said it while wiping down a cracked wooden counter, not even looking at me. I nodded, even though I didn't really understand it until later. The tavern was dim, the candlelight dancing like tiny arena fires. A few soldiers sat in the corner playing dice. Half of them in uniform, half already on their second pitcher. A woman near the door hummed a song I'd heard once during a funeral procession. I thought about how the city felt after the games. Not satisfied, not cleansed, just altered. The Colosseum isn't just a place. It's a mood that lingers. It follows you home. It shows up in your dreams. It tints the way you hear a scream in the night or look at a stranger in the market. Academic debate still floats through scholars' scrolls. Did the games make Rome more violent? Or were they simply a mirror of what it already was? That question feels hollow after you've watched a man bleed out on sand while 50,000 people argued over his fate. Quirky fact of the day? Romans used to collect sand from the arena as a lucky charm, said it carried strength and courage. Me? I found some stuck in my sandal and didn't feel particularly brave. Just gritty. By the time I left the tavern, the streets had quieted. The moon sat low, like a tired spectator that had seen too much. Rome was quieter at night, less boastful, almost tender. I passed a shrine where someone had left gladiator tokens, small carved wooden figures. Broken spears, a strip of red cloth. A little boy stood in front of it, eyes closed, lips moving, maybe a prayer, maybe just a whisper. It hit me then how strange it was, how much we needed those men. We cheered for them, gambled on them, gave them nicknames like heroes in myths. But when they fell, we mourned them like family. They were our courage, our fury, our drama, our own reflections dressed in armor and fear. As I neared my apartment, the lamps burned lower, my sandals scraped stone, my legs ached from sitting too long on stone benches and climbing too many stairs. But more than that, something inside felt stretched, like part of me was still back there, watching, waiting for the next roar, the next decision, the next flick of a thumb. Rome was always loud, always breathing, but tonight, it felt like it was exhaling. I stopped at my doorway, turned, and looked behind me, not at the city, but at the memory of the arena. It was still there, still pulsing, still echoing. Even after the crowd had gone. By the next morning, you'd think the Colosseum never happened. The streets are washed, merchants are shouting again, children chase each other with sticks, pretending they're senators or centurions, depending on their mood. Rome, somehow, always resets. But not me. I woke up with muscles sore from tension I didn't know I was holding. My dreams were chopped up pieces of yesterday, flashes of sand, bursts of shouting, and eyes, so many eyes, watching, judging, pleading. I needed air, or maybe just distraction. I headed to the public baths, which is sort of Rome's version of a therapist's office. Coffee shop and newsstand rolled into one. Everyone talks there, whether you want them to or not. Did you hear? One man whispered while being scraped with a strigil. They're planning a mock naval battle next month. Right in the arena. They'll flood the Colosseum? Someone gasped. Flood it? They've done it before. You've just been too busy chasing wine and tail to notice. True or not, it didn't surprise me. Rome doesn't do small. If we can't drown our boredom in blood, we'll do it in water. And there's the strange thing. After a day in the arena, you'd think people would be sickened, traumatized, changed. But Rome forgets fast. The vendors were already printing cheap wooden dolls shaped like the day's champion. Even the cloth dyeing shop near my home had a crimson banner up. Faventius lives forever. One day you're a slave with a sword, the next, you're a brand. It reminded me of something an old magistrate once muttered after a games, in Rome. Fame travels faster than chariots, but it's twice as fickle. He said it while polishing a ring that probably cost more than the yearly rent of the Sabura. Old age wisdom of the day? Glory doesn't linger, but guilt? That sticks. I tried to shake it. Went to the bakery, the forums, even paid too much for olives just to have a reason to stand in line and hear normal voices. Still, the Colosseum hovered. You know how some places seem to echo louder the further you are from them? Like the silence isn't natural. But carved? That was me. I could hear the cheers. The drums. The announcer's voice booming like thunder on marble. And worse, sometimes I imagined hearing nothing. Just the moment when the crowd holds its breath. When a man stands there alone, waiting for a hand signal to decide his fate. There's a phrase scholars toss around, the theater of death. Sounds dramatic, right? A little too poetic? But when you've sat there, watched the blood dry on stone, and still found yourself clapping, that phrase feels uncomfortably accurate. That night, I visited my cousin. She lives near the Aventine and makes clay lamps for the Temple of Vesta. We sat on her balcony, eating figs, listening to the city settle. "I don't go to the games," she said suddenly. I blinked. "Why not?" She shrugged. "I don't like feeling proud of myself for enjoying horror." That hit me, not because I agreed immediately, but because I wanted to disagree and couldn't. A quirky fact she threw in. Just to lighten the mood? Apparently, flamingos were once used in mock hunts. Their feathers dyed blue. Rome turns even birds into performers. She laughed. We didn't talk much more about the arena, but I watched the way her fingers moved when she lit her lamp. Careful, deliberate, like what she was doing mattered. That's what stuck with me most, how far removed from the games she seemed. Like Rome had two sides, one that roared, and one that simply kept the fire going. Academic debate still circles back to this. Did the Colosseum unify or divide us? Was it the glue that held the empire together, or a crack running through its heart? Some say the shared experience made us stronger. Others argue it eroded compassion. I think both are true. The Colosseum showed us how fragile we all are, and how quickly we forget that. Later that night, back in my room, I lit a lamp and stared at the wall. I didn't sleep, not really. I thought about the faces I'd seen, the screams I'd heard, the crowd chanting for death as if it were no different from dessert. But I also remembered the quiet ones. The woman who cried silently when her favorite lost. The child who hid his face. The stranger who whispered a prayer. Rome is complicated, beautiful and brutal, wise and wildly chaotic. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the Colosseum wasn't just a stage, it was a mirror. And what we saw in it, well, it depended on what we were willing to admit. I'll go again. I know I will. That's the worst part. Because it's not just blood and sand. It's Rome,